Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you tonight from Ra'anana. Tonight's episode is called I Am Iron and You Will Not Break Me. It's July 28th, 2024. And that title, I Am Iron and You Will Not Break Me, comes from a rally I attended last Saturday night at what's known as Kikar Ha'hatufjim, Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. As you know, over 200 hostages were taken from Israel into Gaza on October 7th of 2023, and we still have well over 100 there. In terms of how many are living, it's estimated probably between 40 and 60 are still alive, but there are many bodies there too that we want to get back as well. And kind of unbelievably, my attendance at the rally last Saturday night at Hostage Square. This is a solidarity rally, by the way, with the families of hostages and with the hostages themselves. It was my first one. And before I tell you what it was like to be at this rally, I think it's worth addressing why this was my first one if we are now just about 10 months into the current conflict. And there are a few reasons. Uh, First of all, I was away for a lot of those 10 months. I was on tour twice in the United States for the book Israel 201, once for 4 months, once for three. And during that small period between those tours, I was quite exhausted and just, the thought of going out and down into Tel Aviv, it was too much between the tours. So that was part of it. There was also the element of I'm not sure it's the right thing to do. I've heard a lot about how rallying for the hostages and rallying against the government actually can harden Hamas's position because when they see that the Israeli public is rallying on behalf of a deal to get the hostages out, it makes Hamas think that they can impose ever more stringent terms to their side of the deal, whether it's asking for more prisoners to be released or more Palestinian prisoners to be released from Israel, or to have slower stages of release of our hostages and to make demands that we end the war that they might not be making if they didn't see such enthusiasm for getting the hostages out in Israel. So that's part of it too, is as much as I disagree with the current government, and I'm not alone, over 70% of Israelis want new elections, want this government to go. The question is it the right time to be vocal against the government and in favor of a hostage deal when Hamas is watching and when we have soldiers in Gaza right now? So that was another reason why I was hesitant to go. A third reason is police violence. There have been a lot of cases of police brutality, Israeli police against marchers. Sometimes these were marchers who were lighting fires in the middle of the highway and blocking the highway. But many times it was simply marchers who, or ralliers who had happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And some have been injured permanently or close to permanently, losing an eye from a water cannon, for example, being trampled by a horse or even beaten by cops. And as small as that risk was, I didn't want to take that risk either. And a fourth reason is simply this sounds horrible, but you know, the schlep of going down there. I live in Ra'anana, which is about half an hour away from Tel Aviv. We only have one day off really here in Israel, and that's Saturday. Friday, I do a little bit of work. Most Israelis in the corporate world have Friday off, but it's not a weekend the way it is in the US. Friday is a day where you're preparing Shabbat dinner, where you're doing the shopping, you're still driving your kids to and from school. It's a busy day. And in some ways, it's the most hectic day of the week. So Saturday is our only day off. And part of it is that at the end of that one day off, the Saturday, the thought of Now venturing on a new adventure down into Tel Aviv and joining the ralliers, sometimes I guess a lot of times it felt overwhelming and I felt tired and didn't necessarily feel like doing it. And that sounds terrible to say out loud, but I'm always going to tell you the truth here, and that's one of the factors as well. So why did I go last week for the first time? Well, I've been off tour now for 6 weeks, and I've recovered a bit from that exhaustion. And in that sense, I felt ready and more energetic and ready to venture down and to be a part of it. Number two, I wanted to see what it was like for myself. I'd heard so much about these rallies. I wanted to go ahead and experience them. But most importantly, I think it was that I wanted to know that I had done something. If these hostages come back alive, and of course, I hope they do, and they ask me, what did you do while I was in captivity? What did you do to help get me out? What am I going to say? That I wore dog tags for 10 months? That I had a yellow ribbon tied to the antenna of my car, which is kind of a tradition here to do in Israel, to tie a yellow ribbon to your car antenna or the handle on the door of your car. I wanted to be able to say to them that I did more than that. And going down to the rally was the minimum step I think I can do as an Israeli living here in Israel now, with over 100 of my fellow Israelis being held captive. So I finally did go. And in a moment, I'm going to give you some of the takeaways. But first, I want to tell you what it was like. When I first arrived there, it was just kind of, I hate to use the word festive, but it did feel a little bit festive. There was a big Havdalah circle. This was Saturday night, just as Shabbat was ending. And there was not even a circle, sort of a mishmash of Havdalah being performed with the traditional songs that you guys all know from summer camp. Yain, nine, na, 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 nine, nine, that sort of tune for Havdalah. And there were people playing guitar, and then there were other areas around where people were playing guitar and singing, and it really did feel kind of like festive, not celebratory, but festive in the sense that people were together. People who cared about the same thing were in the same space together. And then the rally itself actually began, and it was a number of speakers. It was mostly families of hostages. Um, it was hosted by a pretty famous actor here in Israel, Lior Eskenazi. I'm sure some of you, if you've seen Israeli films, would recognize him. The main speaker was a former hostage herself, whose husband is still being held in Gaza. And during her speech, she came up and she talked about what it was like to be in captivity and how every day was hell and how we need to get them out, especially the female prisoners, the young ones in their 20s, who we know are being raped and tortured. And then she said the sentence, I am iron and you cannot break me. Ani barzel vetem lo יכולים לשבור אותי. Meaning, this is what she said to herself. She said, this is what I said to myself over and over and over while I was in Gaza. I am iron and you cannot break me. And she said that is what allowed her to survive her captivity. Now, it occurred to me as she said this that this is an incredible woman, that she has that kind of resolve and that kind of confidence and that kind of belief and optimism that if she just remained strong, she could not be broken. And it also occurred to me that not every hostage has that. I think that's a personality thing, and not everybody does have that aspect of their personality, that inner strength. And I worry for the ones who don't have it. But that's where the title of tonight's episode comes from. That older hostage who said, these are the words that I repeated to myself over and over, and that kept me alive in Gaza. I am iron, and you cannot break me. So, what are my takeaways from this? There were actually quite a few takeaways, and I'll give you three or four. Number one, this hostage solidarity rally wasn't nearly as big as I expected it would be. And to be clear, on any given Saturday night, there are a number of rallies happening. The one I attended was the Hostage Solidarity Rally. This is the one where the one goal is to call for an agreement to bring the hostages home, or even if you're not personally supporting an agreement, to express your support for the families of hostages. And that was the one that I attended. Concurrently, at the same time, less than a kilometer away, there's the anti-government rally. This is the rally where people are calling for new elections now. And this rally is a lot louder and with horns and drums and a lot of angry chants. And that's where the police brutality has taken place in the past. This rally that I attended for the hostages was completely, I guess, tame. You know, it was completely, there was no misbehavior, no yelling, really. It was really a solidarity rally. And I don't think I saw any police presence except when Benny Gantz showed up and he had a whole cadre of policemen escorting him. But otherwise, it was very calm. It was very subdued. And to be honest with you, I even felt it was maybe a little too subdued. Um, they would often start a chant, you know, Achshav, Achshav, and it would last for a few seconds. Everyone's shouting, Achshav, Achshav, now, now. But then kind of quickly it would peter out. Um, and between that and also the numbers, I would say there were probably under 4,000 people there, maybe closer to 2,000. It wasn't nearly as big as well, it wasn't nearly as big as I would hope, as I would think. You know, we're coming on 10 months uh, of hostages being in Gaza. And as I was at that rally, I couldn't help but think to myself that in a way, we've kind of gotten used to it. Um, the rally didn't have the furious bite that I expected it might. There wasn't that sense of fury and disbelief. It felt a bit kind of choreographed, kind of rehearsed, like we'd done this before, and now is the time when this happens, and now is the time when this happens. It didn't feel like a spontaneous eruption of fury, disbelief, that we still have hostages there. And I also couldn't help but think about who wasn't there. I mean, if there were, let's say, 10,000 Israelis at this rally, which I think is an overestimate, but let's say if there were 10,000, that would mean that there are, 9,990,000 Israelis who, even though we have over 100 hostages in Gaza, did not feel it was their priority to be rallying for them in Tel Aviv that night. And to be fair, there were some in Jerusalem having a rally and in Haifa and some other places. But I am getting the sense that not just from this rally, but just overall, that Israelis, we're kind of getting used to it and we're exhausted. You got to keep in mind these rallies have been going on not just since October 8th. They've been going on for over a year and a half at this point. They really started in January of 2023 when Netanyahu was engineering judicial reform as a way to change how judges are chosen, but ultimately to make sure he stays in power. And these rallies have been happening now, that's over a year and a half. And I talked to some friends of ours who are extremely vocal and who have attended every rally until just a few weeks ago when they stopped. And they told me they're just beat physically from going down in Tel Aviv every week, emotionally from making this their world for the past year and a half. And you got to realize on top of that, we have a war going on in Gaza. We have what looks like to be a full war about to erupt in the north, but attacks every day in the north from Hezbollah. The general fury and disbelief that we carry around that there doesn't seem to be any response to what Hezbollah is doing to us in the north, in the sense that the government is impotent. Prices are going up. Gas is at a record high. I can tell you this personally that it's well over $100 to fill my small SUV here in Israel. It used to be just under $90, so now it's well over 100, and everyone is feeling this. There's just this sense of it's been such a tough, certainly year and even year and a half, and we're kind of running out of steam. And it scares me. It scares me that we're growing used to having hostages there. And believe me, we all want them out, but we're also just fed up with the circumstances we've had to live under for the past year and a half. And it's taking a toll on us emotionally. So one of my probably my strongest takeaway from being at the rally was there should be more people here. We should be angrier. The Israeli public should be more irate. And yet I understand why we're not seeing more people there because we're tired. It was also very homogeneous. I want to point that out as well. I couldn't help but notice that it was a mostly Ashkenazi of a certain type of social class and group that you could sort of identify. People very much similar to my background. And look, I can't say that all few thousand people looked like me and were of my background, but you just got the sense that it was not representative of a large swath of who Israel is and who Israelis are, but sort of a smaller segment of sort of that elite Tel Aviv segment of society that seemed to be there. It definitely seemed heavily Ashkenazi, as opposed to Sephardic. I did not see many kippot, many yarmulkes on people, a largely secular crowd. There were some, but this worries me too. I mean, the worst thing of all is that we would get used to having hostages there, and that we would sort of check out. What would it take for the government to actually change or for a deal to get signed from because of public pressure? I think, and I've said this before, I think if 500,000 Israelis took to the streets, then you might see real pressure on the government. But even as I was at this rally last week, I was saying to myself, I can see how the government would ignore this. I could see how the government could look at these numbers and say, it's only that, it's not everyone. We're not going to pay attention. They don't speak for all. So I think 500,000, that's my magic number. If we could get 500,000 Israelis out into the streets, then I think change might be possible. Those are my takeaways from the rally. We're going to take a quick break. This is Inside Israel. I'll be back in about 5 seconds. Welcome back. This is Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff, again coming to you from Ra'anana. And in terms of news this week, I'm going to focus on one major news story, and that, not surprisingly, is the bombing, the missile, the attack at the soccer field in Majds al Shamps in the Golan Heights. Majds al Shamps is a Druze village. Uh, the Druze are a very interesting sect of Israeli society. They are Arab, but they are not Muslim. They have roots in Islam from about 1,000 years ago, but they also have aspects, elements of Christianity, Buddhism, other religions. They're generally a very peaceful religion. One of their main tenets is that they are loyal to whichever government is in power. So Druze who lived in the Golan Heights when Syria controlled the Golan Heights were loyal to Syria. The Druze who live there now, as soon as Israel took control of the Golan Heights, they became loyal to Israel. And they serve in the Israeli army. Sadly, we've had a number of soldiers killed since October 7th who are from the Druze community. And a little known statistic, which I'm certain I've mentioned before on this pod, is that the Druze males actually have the level of highest percentage of service in the Israeli army. So of all the sectors of Israeli society, which group has the highest percentage of service in the IDF? It's not Jews, because so many ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews do not serve in the IDF. The sector with the highest percentage of service is actually the Druze, and they serve quite valiantly, often attending high positions and becoming officers. This attack yesterday, here's what I know right now, is that Hezbollah launched this attack. Their intention was to hit an Israeli army base that was nearby, and they took responsibility for attacking this Israeli army base. And then they overshot the base, and this base is on a hill. They overshot the base, and it instead fell in this valley, which is where the soccer field was in the town of Majds al Shamps, killing so far 11 children confirmed. There's a 12th child who's missing, who everyone suspects has been killed, with 26 or more injured, many of them critically and fighting for their lives. So sadly, we could see this death toll go up. All the victims between the ages of 10 and 20. When Hezbollah saw that this is what they had done, they immediately took back. They retracted their claim of responsibility and said, actually, this was not our drone. This was not our missile. And Israel quickly disproved that. They found fragments of the missile that it is manufactured in Iran, used only by Hezbollah. You can read the details in other places, I'm sure. Times of Israel has great coverage. I guess I want to give you the Israeli point of view. So here's what jumps out at us. Here's what Israelis are talking about. In no particular order here. One is the lack of coverage in the rest of the world of this story. When children are killed in Gaza, a lot of attention is paid to it. Here you had 10 to 20-year-olds killed in Israel, and it got a little bit of news, but mostly it was overshadowed by Gaza news. Another big thing Israelis are talking about is how many in the government are saying that this attack crossed all red lines. And so a lot of Israelis are asking, well, what does that mean? That all the attacks until now did not cross the red lines? A couple of weeks ago, we had a married couple driving in the Golan Heights when a Hezbollah missile hit their car, killing the couple instantly, leaving their 3 children to be orphaned. Was that not a red line? We've had other civilians killed in the Golan in the north. We've had soldiers injured and killed in the north. We have 100,000, 80,000 residents of northern Israel who are not able to return to their homes and who have been evacuated since October 8th when Hezbollah started attacking, going on 10 months not living in their homes. Is that not a red line? So there's this general anger in Israel that the government is impotent and that our military is doing nothing, that we're just rolling over and allowing Hezbollah to attack us. And yes, we'll go in and bomb a few things, bomb a few sites, but for the most part, we are allowing ourselves to be beaten up by Hezbollah without taking action. So a lot of the talk here in Israel right now is how did we allow it to get to this point? How did Israel become so impotent, and how did we allow Hezbollah to take control? And a lot of the talk is about how this was really, it's not something that was supposed to happen 3 months ago or a year ago, but that 20 years ago, specifically 18 years ago, we had a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon in 2006. It's called Lebanon 2. And since that war ended, we pretty much took our eye off of Hezbollah and allowed them to build up to what they're to the build up the capabilities to what they're doing right now. So there's a lot of anger in Israel right now that we allowed this to happen. The expectation, the expectation is that there will be some sort of major attack by Israel. We don't know what. There rumors are flying around that the war will begin tonight. At some time in the middle of the night here in Israel, the war will begin. This is unfounded. I haven't heard it from a good source, but this is what Israelis are saying, is that within the next 24 hours, something big is going to happen. That this time we are going to attack in a major way, but that also means we could get hit back in a major way. So a lot of Israelis are putting together those boxes of the corn and the tuna and the water and getting those generators out that I've talked about before in expectation of a war that might finally be here. And I say finally because Israelis have known for a long time that some sort of conflict with Hezbollah in a major way was inevitable. But that is the major story that Israelis are talking about is what is next with regard to the North, and are the hostages going to be out? The other big story is that we're very close to a hostage deal, it sounds, but Netanyahu just submitted a new proposal with some new demands, and some insiders on the negotiating team have anonymously spoken up and said that these new demands that Netanyahu submitted are going to sabotage the talks, that they are going to pretty much guarantee that Hamas won't accept them and guarantee that the deal will fall through. Uh, which brings us back to that first point of the hostage solidarity rallies. I've realized that the reason to go to these rallies is not because we believe that the government is going to listen to us and put a deal together because we are amassing in Hostage Square. The real point of these rallies is to show support for the families of the hostages. When they spoke, what I remember hearing from them most was how much it meant to them to see the Israeli public supporting them. And over, they urged us from the podium not to forget, please don't forget, please don't acclimate and adapt and assume that this is just the status quo, even though that's kind of what it feels like we might be doing and where we're headed. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back for your questions. So I'm going to take two questions that people emailed in, and then I'm going to look at the chat because I think we have a couple of there. So Anita from just outside Washington, D.C. wrote, how are Israelis viewing the U.S. presidential election? There was some talk of it this week before the bombing yesterday in the Golan Heights in Majds al Shamps. Um, a lot of Israelis say they favor Trump. I don't think they know necessarily what they're talking about. They just feel like Trump would allow Israel to take the military action it wants and would could operate unchecked. I think they believe incorrect. I think they're mistaken, but I think they believe that the U.S. would support Israel and attack Iran, attack Hezbollah. I don't necessarily think that would happen, even if Trump were the president. I think a lot of people also have reacted to Kamala Harris's statements. I've been bothered by some of her statements about the emotion we're seeing on college campuses over what's happening in Gaza is that's what true human emotion, positive human emotion looks like, something like that. And she's had a number of other statements which I believe have been anti-Israel. But really, for the past 24 hours, 36 hours, the bombing that took place yesterday in Majds al Shamps has been the major news story, and people are not focusing on the presidential election. We're thinking about our own circumstances. What's going to happen? Are we having this war with Hezbollah finally? Is the hostage deal going to come through? So it's some attention, but really, really not much. We're thinking about our own government and our own problems here. Sharon, who's a friend of mine, wrote in. She said that my daughter works at a Zionist camp in Wisconsin, and I heard that the Israeli campers were re-traumatized by fireworks on the 4th of July. And she goes on to explain that this summer camp, Camp Herzl, every summer has a group of campers from Sderot in southern Israel, just to give them a break from the challenge of life in Israel and living in the south. They also had to memorialize a former camper who was killed on October 7th. And so what she said was, maybe I can talk a bit about the phenomena of Israelis, both campers and staff, coming to Jewish summer camps in North America. Uh, I've always felt that this is one of the most important things for the future of Judaism. We talk a lot about birthright, which is where Jewish kids from around the world go to Israel. But I think just as important, maybe more important, is the reverse birthright, where Israelis come to other countries, specifically North America, and they work in our schools and our summer camps, and they see that there are different ways to be Jewish besides just the way they grew up, which is either Orthodox or nothing. They come out of summer camp learning that Judaism can be song, it can be study, not in a yeshiva type of way, but just enjoying delving a little deeper into Torah together. Um, it allows them to rethink Judaism as spirituality, not just as laws and religion. So I think it's super important to keep bringing Israelis to our camps, both as staff and as campers. But I also think it's a bit ignorant and sad that these campers were re-traumatized on the 4th of July. I think it shows the gap between what American camp directors and staff perceive about Israel and the reality. I don't think Americans in general realize quite how traumatic October 7th was for Israelis and how much PTSD so many of us are carrying around. Um, it seems to me an obvious mistake having fireworks on the 4th of July when you have Israeli campers, kids who had to go through October 7th hearing bombs and gunfire. And really, that's what we've been hearing for the past 10 months. Um, but it shows to me the delta between what Israelis are truly going through and how Jews around the world are actually perceiving it. It is different. I'll take a question in the chat because I thought this was a good one. Where was it? In your opinion, is it fear or overall apathy that keeps more people away from the rallies in Tel Aviv? Look, this is just my opinion. I think it's a couple things. One, I think it's a lack of faith that these rallies can actually make a difference. Now, if everyone were to put that aside and come out and we could reach that magic number of, say, 500,000, then they maybe could make a difference. But I think there is a general belief that it's pointless. I think maybe Israelis don't quite realize that the point of these hostage rallies is not necessarily to free the hostages, but to support the families of the hostages, that is an achievable goal when we have these rallies. But it's exhaustion as well. I mean, this has been an exhausting year and a half for Israelis, and since October especially. Think of how many people have loved ones serving in Gaza or that were in Gaza. the thought of taking your one day off and now venturing out to partake in this other event, it can feel like too much. We we're just beat. So I think it's those things. I wouldn't necessarily say apathy because that makes it seem like we don't care, but just exhaustion and lack of faith that it could actually make a difference. Um, and then you gotta realize there are a lot of people who don't believe that's the correct course, who truly believe that we shouldn't be getting together in public like this because all it does is embolden Hamas. Um, and that better work is done not rallying, but helping the soldiers, helping the families directly. So that's my take on that. Next week's broadcast. It's going to happen again on Sunday night at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The audio version of this one that you heard right now will be up on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts within about 36 hours. The recording, the video of this will be on my website, joelchasnoff.com/podcast within 24 hours from now. Please do continue to send your questions in. I love hearing your questions. Also, if you have feedback, hopefully the good kind, but also any kind, you can send your questions, your feedback, and anything else to me through the website. Again, joelchasnoff.com/podcast. I wish all of you a peaceful week, a week of quiet, hopefully, and health, a, a week where next time when we get together on Sunday night, we have good news. That would be wonderful for all of us. Signing off now from Ra'anana, Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Inside Israel. Have a great rest of your night. So long.